Templeton, the young cartographer from Conocon whose dream is to map the entire Suikoden world. Templeton is a character that most people kind of gloss over without paying much attention to. He received minimal development in the games he appeared in, joining the player after witnessing the destruction caused by war and lamenting the need to redraw his map. As a character, he really just exists to provide the player with a map. He does have some fans though, and those fans will be happy to know that he received a short story titled Indelible Footprints, which was included in the Genso Suikoden Short Story Collection 3, a book that released in Japan in December 2001. This is a short story that many fans may dismiss or initially think they won't care for due to it being about Templeton, but I think you'll be surprised at how enjoyable this story is. It takes place at the beginning of Suikoden 2 in the city-states of Joustin. Throughout this story, Templeton encounters and interacts with some fan favourites like Nanami, Ryu, Flick, Victor and Leona. The story really fleshes out Templeton as a character and provides him with some much-needed development. Chapter 1. It was a chilly night at the mercenary fortress. A guard arrived to inform Flick and Victor that they'd captured an intruder. Victor finished his drink and put his mug down before asking the guard if they'd caught a Highland spy, or if they merely beat up a lone traveller. The guard replied that it was just a little brat nosing around the fort. He found it very suspicious as the boy's only weapon appeared to be a rune scroll and he claimed to be from the Tauren Republic, though he didn't look like he was dressed for such a long trip. At the same time, Flick and Victor replied, "Tauren?" and immediately got up from their chairs. The two fought in the Liberation Army during the Gate Rune War and were in the country up until around 3 years ago. However, they were more familiar with the old name, the Scarlet Moon Empire. They had left the country immediately following the fall of Gregminster and had only heard the name Tauren Republic after arriving in the city-states of Joustin. They had only heard rumours about what their old companions had been getting up to, and hearing the name Tauren piqued their interest. At the sound of Victor's heavy footsteps, the dining room fell silent. Flick and Victor could see the confusion on their men's faces as the guards surrounded a young boy. He was no older than 14, with golden brown hair and wearing a blue hat, a white shirt, a cream vest, knee-high blue socks and knee-length grey trousers. It was hard to believe that this young boy had travelled all the way from Tauren dressed like this, and only the backpack he was carrying seemed to suggest he was a traveller. Flick called out Templeton's name and told him it's been a while. Templeton smiled in relief as he saw Flick and Victor. Victor then told everybody that this guy isn't suspicious as he slapped Templeton on the back with such force that he got pushed forward. They commented how tall he's grown in the past 3 years. Templeton replied that the length of his stride has changed and he doesn't want to grow too suddenly. Flick asked him that since he's here it must mean that he's finished drawing his map of Tauren. Templeton responded that it took him a while to fix the map of Tauren thanks to the war, but currently he's here hoping to draw a map of the city-states of Joustin. He then pulled out a folded piece of paper from his bag. Templeton unfolded the paper to reveal a map. He pointed at the map and asked if this was Ryubei village, as according to the map he should already be there. Flick told him that Ryubei is half a day's travel northeast of here as he pointed at its correct location on the map. Templeton sighed heavily. He had purchased the map from a merchant in South Window, but the distance and directions of everything was wrong. He then began complaining that they could use a more updated and accurate map. Victor laughed and told Templeton that he's the only person who cares about such things, that all you need to know is the rough route and you can find where you're going. Despite his words, Victor then praised Templeton for the quality and detail of his maps, saying that they're on a different level from every other map. Templeton responded that he doesn't agree that maps should be taken so lightly, but he's happy Victor appreciates his work. He then asked if he can spend the night as he's feeling a little tired. Victor replied that it wasn't a problem and he could stay for a while if he wanted to, but they can't serve much food right now as rations are tight. Victor then explained to Templeton that they're currently working as mercenaries for the Mayor of Muse and asked him if he'd consider making a map of the Highland Kingdom. Templeton replied that he heard in South Window that there's a truce right now. Victor responded that since there's a truce right now, travelling to Highland isn't hard, but he'd like for him to make a detailed map of Highland just in case the truce doesn't hold. He then told Templeton that he can't promise exactly what the reward will be, but he can negotiate with the Mayor of Muse for a fair reward. Victor tried to reason with Templeton, saying he'd be going to Highland sooner or later anyway, so why not do it now and get paid. Templeton interrupted Victor's words. He confirmed he'd be going to Highland eventually, but not until after he's finished drawing a map of the city-states, and he's not looking to be contracted by anyone to draw a map, and he's worried that with any more distractions, he'll never be able to draw a map of the world. Victor replied maybe that can't be helped, that maybe it's time another person will appear to lead the stars of destiny to change history once again. Templeton again responded no and told Victor that even if he was to meet such a fate again, he wouldn't cooperate so willingly this time. Victor continued trying to convince Templeton to help, but Flick cut him off and told him to stop, that Templeton doesn't make his living fighting like they do. Flick then apologized to Templeton for Victor's behavior. Flick told him to get some rest and asked him to draw a map of the fort while he's here. Templeton responded that he'll give them a map of the fort and of South Window to pay for his lodging. He then pulled out a notebook, a pen, ink and some surveying tools from his backpack and got to work. Templeton was woken up by a noise in the early morning, and much to his surprise, not a single mercenary was in the room sleeping. He got up out of bed and made his way to the dining room. Leona looked at him and put her pipe down before approaching him. She asked him if he was the guest that arrived yesterday and offered to get him something to eat, but apologized that she can't give him much. Templeton sat at a table and Leona brought him a bowl of soup and a small piece of bread. He asked her where Flick, Victor and everybody else is. Leona told him that they're not here right now as there were sightings of a boy being washed away by the river and they went to help him. She then told Templeton that she'll take care of him in their absence. Templeton drank his soup, which was light and lacked seasoning, and the bread was hard, almost as if it was stale. Leona noticed the expression on Templeton's face as he ate his food, and she muttered with a sigh that the food and rewards are much better for mercenaries during times of war, but things are rough for them during times of peace, though she's grateful there are no battles to fight. Templeton finished his meal and pulled out a rolled piece of paper from his backpack and handed it to Leona. It was a map of the Torn Republic, South Window and the mercenary fortress. He asked her to give it to Flick and Victor as a thank you for the bed and the meal. Leona told him to come back anytime he needs a roof to sleep under. Templeton then left the mercenary fortress and headed northeast to Ryubei village as Chapter 1 comes to an end. Chapter 2. Chapter 2 opens with Templeton sitting on a tree stump and updating his map with his findings from his most recent survey that he had documented in his notebook. He had spent the last 12 days since leaving the mercenary fortress surveying the land of Eastern Mews. He spent 2 days surveying the land all around Ryubei village, 5 days surveying the path leading to North Swallow Pass, and another 5 days surveying the road leading to Toto village. His notebook was densely inscribed with numbers and symbols. If anyone else read his notebook, they'd have no idea what any of it meant. The sun was beginning to set and Templeton held up the map he had been working on until the ink dried. He made sure the ink had dried before rolling it up and stuffing it into his bag. There were dozens of maps in his bag that he had drawn on his travels, from the island of Kanakon all the way up to South Window in the city-states. His maps were far more accurate and detailed than any other map on the market. He briefly pulled out another piece of paper from his bag and carefully opened it up. It was an old, brittle map that could be easily torn apart with little force. The colour had faded from many parts of the map and the letters were faint and hard to read. Templeton sighed in satisfaction and carefully rolled the map up and placed it back in his bag. Just then, he could hear a growl coming from behind him. He searched his bag for his Thunder Runner scroll and turned around to see a deep indigo-coloured wolf-like beast called a shadow dog approaching him. Shadow dogs normally travelled in groups, but this one must have been separated from its pack. Templeton slowly moved backwards without turning his back to the shadow dog. He glanced sideways at the nearby forest and moved towards a secret path he had found during his surveys. He knew he could escape if he made it to the path, but the beast was now standing in front of him. He held up his Thunder Runner scroll, but just then he heard a voice call out to him to run away. Stones started flying from the road towards the shadow dog and Templeton ran to create some distance. The shadow dog turned its attention to the voice coming from the road. Templeton then picked up a stone and threw it at the beast, causing it to flinch. A large stone then came flying at the beast from the road, hitting it right on the nose, causing the beast to let out a whimper and retreat into the forest. Suddenly, there was a boy slightly taller than Templeton standing in front of him breathing a sigh of relief. He asked Templeton if he was okay. The boy had a round head, a bulbous nose and a childish friendly face. His scruffy, uneven black hair was tied up and his clothes had several stains. He was carrying a sword and wore a breastplate, but the sword didn't look well maintained and the breastplate was crudely carved from a piece of wood. The boy smiled and Templeton noticed he was missing one of his front teeth. Templeton didn't think he looked like one of the people from the mercenary fortress, but rather he seemed to be imitating a mercenary. The boy told Templeton that he was lucky there was only one shadow dog and that it didn't seem to be hungry, because if it was, it wouldn't have run away so easily. Templeton thanked the boy for his help, but told him that he didn't need any help and he could have managed it by himself. The boy looked at Templeton suspiciously and loudly commented, "It looks like he's unarmed." Templeton replied he has a map and with it he can escape from any monster, and that's how he's protected himself up until now. Templeton explained his maps to the boy, that his maps depicted paths that no one knew about, and using these secret paths he could easily avoid monsters and travel through mountains and forests as quickly as if he was walking on a road. The boy didn't seem convinced by Templeton's explanation, but didn't push the matter further. He then introduced himself and revealed his name was Colin. Colin was 16 years old and lived in a village near Mews. Templeton told him he was on his way to Toto Village and Colin offered to accompany him as it's not far from where they are and he was concerned Templeton might be attacked again. Templeton declined his offer, stating he always travels alone and a companion would be a hindrance. Colin shrugged off Templeton's words and insisted he was coming along to make sure he reaches Toto safely. Templeton sighed in resignation and reluctantly agreed to allow Colin to accompany him. When the two reached Toto Village, Templeton thanked Colin and tried to part ways. He had been unable to survey the road while accompanied by Colin and arrived in Toto much earlier than planned. He hoped to say goodbye and return to the road early in the morning. Colin asked him if he was planning on spending the night and Templeton responded that he'll be staying here for a while. Colin then told Templeton that he doesn't have much money and asked him if he wanted to share a room as it'll be cheaper for two people to split the fee. Templeton wanted to part ways with Colin as soon as possible, but he didn't have much money either. If it was just for one night, he could tolerate the company to save some money. The two rented a room to share, and as they entered the room, Templeton asked Colin why was he in the area where they met. Colin replied that he was on his way to the mercenary fortress when they ran into each other, and Templeton responded by telling him that he's currently going in the wrong direction. Colin replied that he's not. He was on his way to the mercenary fortress, but when he saw Templeton alone, unarmed and in danger, he couldn't leave him alone. Templeton thought to himself how good-natured Colin is, and then asked him why he's going to the fort. Colin responded that his brother works there and he always sends money home, so he decided to work there too, as there are no decent jobs in his village. Colin came from a family of 7. He has 2 brothers and 2 sisters. His family were farmers, but their fields had been ravaged by the war between the city-states and Highland. Taxes were high and it was difficult to survive. His father left to work in Mews and his older brother left to work as a mercenary. They both sent money home to help the family, but his brother earned more than his father. Colin decided to join his brother as a mercenary to further help their family. Templeton couldn't imagine such a good-natured person like Colin fighting someone and said to Colin that he doesn't believe he's cut out to be a mercenary. Colin replied that he has to feed his family. Templeton responded that he doesn't think the mercenaries are hiring right now as the jobs are all gone and they're struggling to feed the people they already have. Colin replied there's less work because of the truce, but his brother recently sent money with a letter and told him that there's plenty of small jobs such as border lookouts and repairing city walls. He then said that if he can't get a job as a mercenary, he'll travel to South Window to search for work as he wants to save up money to send his younger siblings to New Leaf Academy to get an education. Colin then pulled a sacrificial Buddha out of his luggage. Templeton asked him what it is, and with a smile on his face, Colin told him that his sister stayed up all night the day before he left to make it for him. Sacrificial Buddhas sell for 5,000 poch apiece. If his sister is able to make one of those per night, that family should already be living a life of luxury. Colin then said how could he not try his best as an older brother if his sister made something like this for him. Templeton replied and told him that being a mercenary is dangerous and he could die, and it's a stupid job to have if you have a family to take care of. Colin fell silent, and Templeton, fearing he went too far with his words, decided to stop talking as Chapter 2 comes to an end. Chapter 3. The next morning, Templeton said goodbye to Colin and left the inn. He took only the equipment he needed for surveying and left the rest of his belongings at the inn. He returned down the road the way they came the night before and was confident he could finish his work by nightfall, but he thought it would be awkward if he ran into Colin again, who was travelling to the mercenary fortress, so he tried to walk off the road as soon as possible. As he began walking off the road, he heard Colin call out to him. Colin ran up to him and smiled while catching his breath, not noticing the annoyed expression on Templeton's face. Colin asked Templeton where he's going and told him there's nothing out here. Templeton replied that he knows, but he didn't get to finish his work yesterday, so he's doing it now. Colin remembered that Templeton had told him he was working on a map and asked him if he was talking about surveying. Colin then told him that he might get attacked by a monster again if he strays too far from the road. Templeton replied in an annoyed tone that he already told him he has ways to protect himself. He suggested that Colin should go on ahead to the mercenary fortress and not to worry about him. Templeton turned his back and walked away, but Colin followed after him in silence. Becoming even more irritated, Templeton turned around and asked him what he's doing. Colin stumbled for words and smiled as he struggled to come up with a reason. He told Templeton that he'll stick with him for now, just in case another shadow dog attacks. Templeton told him he doesn't need him and he can't afford to hire him, so he better head to the fort as soon as possible. Colin retorted, telling Templeton that you don't take money from a friend and this is something he's doing voluntarily. Templeton asked Colin when they became friends, but as Colin tried to answer, he walked away and began surveying. Colin watched with interest while Templeton worked and asked him what the weird contraption in his hand is. Templeton replied it's a quadrant and that it's used to make astronomical calculations and to measure angles to figure out where you are. Colin let out a laugh and said you can see the stars from anywhere, but then asked if you can really tell where you are just by looking at them. Before Templeton could answer, Colin pointed at another piece of his equipment that looked like a compass and asked him what it was. Templeton replied that it's similar to a quadrant. He pulled a tripod out of his backpack and assembled it, and told Colin that it's used for measuring the direction of distant mountains. Colin replied, "Is that so?" and asked how he works out the distance. Templeton told him you measure it with your feet. If you know your stride, you can accurately calculate the distance. Colin looked at all of Templeton's equipment and notes with curiosity. His questions didn't stop and he asked Templeton about everything he was doing. Much to Templeton's surprise, Colin seemed to be genuinely interested in his work. Although people always wanted his maps, this was the first time that anyone had ever shown interest in the work itself. Templeton took Colin along with him to continue his surveying and decided to try a method that couldn't be done without the help of another person. Colin eagerly agreed to assist him with the work. Templeton took more breaks than usual throughout the day because of Colin, and he didn't get as much work done as he usually does, but he smiled to himself as he thought it's not so bad having Colin around. After all, it's just for one day, then tomorrow it's goodbye to Colin and he can get back to his usual more detailed surveys. At least, that's what he thought. And that's the end of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. Later that evening back at the inn, Templeton told Colin that he was planning on going to Mews and suggested that he continue his own trip to the mercenary fortress. Colin replied that he'd go to the fort with peace of mind if Templeton was taking a carriage, but since he plans on surveying, that must mean he'll be walking, so he'll tag along to keep him safe. Templeton responded that he doesn't need an escort as the road to Mews should be safe as monsters rarely appear. Colin replied that there are bandits along the road and they'll attack anyone, even children, if they think they have something valuable. Colin then told him that Mews is about a 2 days walk from Toto and he finds surveying to be quite interesting, so he wants to come along and help. Templeton sighed heavily. Colin was a good person, but stubborn, and Templeton knew that even if he rejected Colin's offer, he'd follow him anyway, so he reluctantly agreed to allow Colin to accompany him. They left the inn early in the next morning. As they made their way towards the bridge on the west side of the village, Templeton spotted what appeared to be a large shrine at the back of the village. He asked one of the villagers about it, and the villager told him that 2 heroes sealed something important in there many years ago, and the people of the village guard the shrine. Templeton felt anxious while thinking about what might be on the other side of the shrine door, and a strange tingling sensation ran down his spine. He remembered having a feeling just like this once before. Just then, the door of the house next to the shrine opened up and a group of people came out. 2 boys and a girl, all slightly older than Templeton, followed by 2 adults and a young girl that looked like their child. The 2 boys thanked them many times. And then, perhaps noticing Templeton's gaze, one of the boys turned around and their eyes met. It was a boy with dark brown hair, a golden circlet on his head, and wearing a red tunic. The image of a person he once knew came to mind. Their faces and figures were nothing alike, but his demeanour reminded Templeton of Tyr, the boy who bore a true rune and who once united the Stars of Destiny and led the Liberation Army against the Scarlet Moon Empire. Colin called out to Templeton, but Templeton turned his gaze back to the shrine. He sensed that something important was sealed inside. It was the same feeling he got from those who bore a true rune. Templeton shook his head as he tried to shake the thoughts from his mind. The shrine most certainly housed the true rune, but there was no point thinking about it as it was of no concern to him. Templeton and Colin passed the trio and made their way towards the bridge. There were more important things for him to deal with right now than a rune. He needed to get to Mews as soon as possible so he could send Colin away to the mercenary fortress. Colin had told Templeton that they could reach Mews in 2 days, but based on Colin's stride and the surveying he wanted to do, Templeton determined it would take at least 3 days to reach Mews. He'd prefer to spend more time doing more detailed surveys, but it couldn't be helped while Colin was tagging along. When the sun went down after their first day on the road, they prepared a camp just a little off the road. After their meal, Colin asked Templeton why he drew maps. He told Templeton that it makes sense to want to map the surroundings of where you live, but travelling and making maps isn't something that a 14-year-old boy normally does. Templeton replied that he wants to make a map of the entire world, and to do that he needed to start surveying as early as possible. Colin then asked him why he wanted to make a map of the world and wondered if he inherited the interest from his father. Templeton told him he started because of his own interest. He first saw a map when he was 5 or 6 years old. A peddler had passed through his village and possessed a map of the area surrounding his village. To Templeton, it first looked like a nondescript painting, but his parents and the peddler told him it was important and that by having a map, travellers could travel without losing their way. Templeton was impressed by the bends in the roads on the maps and how they aided people in reaching their destination. He instantly became interested and began collecting various maps, buying all of the maps in his village and buying whatever maps people had bought and brought back from other villages. As he unfolded and studied all of the maps he collected, he noticed something strange. Maps depicting the same areas were all different. Not only the distance and direction between locations, but also the names of the villages. Templeton then pulled a piece of paper out of his bag. He carefully spread it out and showed Colin, but warned him to be careful because it was very old. He told Colin the maps on the markets today were made by people who didn't survey the land properly or were copied from old maps, so there are villages and places where there should be forests and some villages no longer exist. He then pointed at the map and told Colin that even though this map is very old, he often references it while conducting his surveys. The map was made a very long time ago. The map was so old that the borders, nations and names were very different from today, but even so, the person who made it was able to map a decent portion of the world, more accurately than any other map that existed today. But the map stops as if there's an edge to the world. Templeton said he doesn't believe there's an edge to the world and that he aims to draw an accurate up-to-date map of the entire world. Colin told him it's a great goal, but it sounds like a lot of work. He added that he only knows the area around Mews and he can tell from looking at the map that the locations of surrounding countries and villages are completely different than they are today. Templeton told him he hates the fact that maps change as soon as a war takes place. He then explained the Liberation War that took place in the Scarlet Moon Empire and how he had to redraw the map when the war was over because the name of the country changed and some villages were destroyed. He added that not all battles are bad, but if there was no war, then maps would change less often. Colin agreed with Templeton's words with a sigh. He said he was trying to become a mercenary to support his family, but if there were no more wars, he and his brother could support them with odd jobs instead. He then softly muttered he wished there were no more wars. Suddenly, Templeton noticed something. No matter how many times he told Colin to go to the mercenary fortress like he planned to, he came up with an excuse to stay by Templeton's side, and he finally felt like he understood the real reason why. The next night, Colin and Templeton stopped at White Deer Inn. Templeton urged Colin to go to the mercenary fortress tomorrow, saying that he'll be fine as Mews is only a short walk down the road from here. Colin replied and told Templeton that he has to go off the road where it's not safe to survey. Templeton responded that he's almost out of ink and paper, so he's planning on restocking and spending time in Mews before thinking about surveying again. In truth, Templeton had plenty of ink and paper left in his bag, but he knew Colin would continue following him if he knew he planned to keep surveying. The mercenary fortress was getting further and further away, and so was Colin's dream of sending his younger siblings to New Leaf Academy in Greenhill City. Templeton felt bad about Colin tagging along and putting his own dreams on hold, and he wasn't getting as much work done as he normally would alone. Colin gave Templeton a pained look for a moment and then looked as if he had made up his mind. He told Templeton he understands, but he better hire someone at Muse to keep him safe, or at least consult at the town hall about his work and they may send someone to aid him. Templeton was relieved that Colin agreed to head to the mercenary fortress and asked him if he knew the way from here. Colin replied that he does, as his brother drew a map for him, and asked Templeton if it'll take long to reach there from Toto Village. Templeton grimaced as he looked at Colin's brother's map. He told Colin that he'll never reach the fort if he follows that map. He then unfolded a piece of paper and began drawing a new map for Colin to use to get to the fortress. Templeton muttered as he compared Colin's brother's map to the one he bought in South Window. He told Colin that certain villages and forests are gone and they no longer exist. Templeton then finished drawing the map and handed Colin a map showing him the route from White Deer Inn to the mercenary fortress. He told Colin that there are some uncertainties from here to Toto as they didn't do much surveying, but he should know the path as they just walked it. Colin thanked Templeton and told him how amazing his map was. He then laughed as he compared it to his brother's map and commented how different they are. He then turned to Templeton and pointed at the map just northwest of White Deer Inn and told him that this is where his village is. He said it's so small he's never seen it on a map before, but he's certain Templeton will draw it. Templeton replied he'll draw it accurately, no matter how small it is. Colin told Templeton that he'll be looking out for his map of the world in a few years, and he doesn't want to hear anything about him not being able to survey the entire world. Colin then handed Templeton a piece of paper. It was a document with the signature of the Mayor of Muse and marked with a red seal. He told Templeton it was an entry pass and he won't be able to enter the city without it. Templeton thanked him and Colin gave him a weak smile. Colin looked down at his feet and told Templeton he's sorry for being such a bother and for being so annoying, but he's scared because he doesn't really want to become a mercenary. Templeton replied that he knows he doesn't want to become a mercenary, and Colin responded that everyone is counting on him. Colin pulled out the sacrificial Buddha his sister had made for him and squeezed it tightly as he stared at it. Templeton wondered for a moment if he should stop him, that instead of becoming a mercenary they could find a job for him in Muse, but he couldn't bring himself to speak those words. Instead, he told Colin he shouldn't be ashamed of being scared, that he hasn't met anyone who likes to fight and they're all scared inside. Colin thanked Templeton for his words, but there was a hint of fear in his voice. Templeton felt bad for pushing Colin to go to the mercenary fortress, but he convinced himself in his mind that Colin has his own path and he can't stop him from following it. In the morning, the two parted ways. Colin waved goodbye to Templeton from a distance and began walking down the road towards Toto Village. Templeton felt sad and lonely for a while as he had gotten used to Colin's company, but he soon forgot as he became engrossed in his surveying. Templeton spent the next week thoroughly surveying the land around Muse as Chapter 4 comes to an end. Chapter 5. Templeton arrived at Muse City. Soldiers were organising people into lines and checking their documents before allowing them inside. While standing in line, Templeton heard people gossiping about how Highland broke the ceasefire agreement and attacked the city-states. Templeton thanked Colin in his head for the entry pass, as there's no way he'd be allowed inside the city under these circumstances without one. Templeton was unhappy that a war had broken out, as he may have to rework his maps, but he was relieved that Colin would now be able to get a job as a mercenary, and if a war broke out, he'd be taken care of by Flick and Victor. Upon entering Muse, a young man who was travelling alone called out to Templeton and proposed splitting the cost of a room together. So that's a little nod to Templeton meeting Nash Lackey in Suikoden Volume 1, Episode 2. Templeton and Nash met while standing in line together waiting to gain entry to Muse, and they have a pretty lengthy conversation when they get inside, but in the game it's Templeton who suggests that they split the fee. Templeton was in shock when he spotted a familiar woman in a red dress smoking a pipe sitting at the entrance of the inn. It was Leona, the same woman he met at the mercenary fortress. Entering the inn, Templeton was shocked again to see Flick and Victor inside having a drink at the back of the tavern. Templeton thought to himself, if the Highlanders had really attacked like the rumours he had heard, then surely the leaders of the mercenaries should be out engaging them in battle and not hanging around in a tavern having a drink. He thought about approaching them and asking about Colin, but thought there was no way they'd remember the names and faces of every mercenary. Besides, if they're here and drinking so leisurely, he doesn't need to worry about Colin, and perhaps the rumours of Highland attacking were really just rumours after all. Templeton decided to hide himself from their view as he was worried Victor would once again ask him to draw some maps for him. Nash booked their room and handed Templeton the key while he stayed in the tavern and had a drink. Templeton made his way up the stairs into his room and thought he should finish his work here in Mews quickly and then head over to Greenhill as fast as possible. He spent the next 3 days surveying the outskirts of Mews, but security was tightening and the guards were beginning to look at him suspiciously, so he gave up surveying outside from the fort day. He was already using someone else's entry pass, and if the guards stopped him to question him about what he was doing, he feared he'd be accused of espionage. On the 3rd day, Nash left the city, and Templeton now had the room to himself. On the 4th day, he decided to survey the inside of the city, and spent the next few days drawing up several maps from South Window to Ryube to Toto to Mews. He tried to throw away the maps he had made mistakes on, but he stopped and wondered if it was really possible to create a map of the world that wouldn't change. After all, he had already drawn dozens of maps that he had to throw away and redraw thanks to wars. The Torn Republic had been at peace for 3 years, but how long would that peace last? And now there were rumours of the city-states being at war with Highland. He threw the maps with mistakes into the trash and unfolded a new piece of paper, but his hand stopped as he was about to begin drawing. He remembered that Colin told him his village was nearby and that it was so small it had never been mapped before. Templeton thought he'd go survey it tomorrow. He didn't care if the guards gave him funny looks, as Colin would be disappointed in him if he forgot to map his village. Feeling rejuvenated at the thought, Templeton began drawing a new map before going to bed. He was awoken during the night by the sound of horses galloping through the streets and the voices of soldiers shouting. He jumped out of bed and saw a fire burning outside the window. He quickly packed his things and ran down the stairs, where he bumped into Flick and Victor giving instructions to their men. Flick noticed Templeton and asked him why he's here. He then told Templeton to run as fast as he can, as Highland has invaded and they don't show mercy, not even to children. Templeton asked him why he didn't evacuate the residents before the attack happened. Victor responded that's what they wanted to do, but they were too late. Highland attacked the surrounding villages before sieging the city, and there's no one left to evacuate. Victor's words repeated in Templeton's head over and over, and Templeton cried out why as he worried about Colin's village. Overcome with emotion, Templeton began shouting involuntarily at Flick and Victor, asking them what the hell they were doing, that they had so many soldiers at the fortress, and questioning why they didn't send anyone to scout the Highland army's movements. They told Templeton that the fort is gone and so are the surrounding villages, and that only half of their men made it out alive. Templeton held on to the handrail of the stairs to support his trembling body. He wanted to hold on to that little bit of hope that Colin was still alive, as he asked them when the villages and the fort were attacked. As Flick told him when Toto village was attacked, Templeton's worry grew even more. It was 2 days after he and Colin parted ways at White Deer Inn, the same amount of time it would have taken Colin to reach Toto. Templeton asked them if a boy slightly older than him named Colin made it to their fort. Flick responded that nobody by that name came to the fort after Toto and Ryube were destroyed. Only Apple, a man called Sai, and a girl named Pilika. At Flick's words, Templeton froze in shock. There had been many people he encountered that he knew he'd never see again, and he knew that war and living a long life didn't go hand in hand, but this was different. By not allowing Colin to follow him, he feared that Colin may have been caught up in a battle and that it was all his fault. Still stunned and frozen, Templeton heard a low sound in his ears. He finally snapped out of it as Victor patted him on the cheek and told him that they'd carve a path for him to escape. The front door of the inn then started banging as the Highland soldiers were trying to force their way inside. Templeton asked them what they planned to do. Victor responded that they were going to try and rally their companions and that they'd flee to South Window when they get a chance. He encouraged Templeton to head there, telling him that maybe his friend Colin made it there too. At Victor's words, Templeton looked up with a small glimmer of hope that Colin had made it to safety. He handed Victor a map of Mews that contained secret paths, allowing them to escape. Flick and Victor then rushed out the door and engaged the Highland soldiers. Templeton started running, but everywhere was engulfed in flames and he couldn't breathe properly with all of the smoke. He spotted Highland and Mew soldiers dead in the streets, along with men, women, children and animals who had nothing to do with the battle. Trying not to look at the bodies, Templeton ran through the alleys and made his way towards a broken wall to escape the city. Having made it safely out of Mews, Templeton ran along the road to Toto village. He wanted to confirm that Colin wasn't in the village when it was attacked and hoped he had fled to Coronet or South Window. As he was running to Toto, Templeton began to question himself. He wondered why he didn't try to stop Colin from going to the mercenary fortress, that maybe none of this would have happened if he allowed Colin to stay with him. Arriving at Toto, Templeton was shocked at what he saw. Houses had been burned down, the ground was stained with blood, and a nauseating smell wafted through the village. There wasn't a soul in sight. Not long ago, this was a village full of laughter and the villagers had shown him nothing but kindness, but now that seemed like an illusion. Holding back the tears in his eyes, Templeton began searching the crumbled buildings. He felt a sense of relief every time he searched a building and didn't see Colin. His heart told him to stop searching as thoughts raced through his head that he's certain Colin fled to Coronet when Toto was attacked. Just then, Templeton saw something half buried in the dirt. It was a small piece of wood wrapped in cloth. He fell to his knees on the spot. He tried to suppress his emotions as he picked up Colin's sacrificial Buddha. He wanted to cry, but his trembling breath stopped any words from coming out of his mouth. As he held the sacrificial Buddha, he thought about how Colin wanted to look at his map of the world. He had no idea how much time had passed, but he finally stood up and began walking aimlessly through the village. When he came close to the shrine, he noticed the seal had been broken and the door was open. He thought it must have been destroyed when the village was attacked. Noticing signs of footsteps inside, Templeton was horrified when he no longer sensed the true rune inside. What kind of power did the rune possess, and what kind of horrors would the Highlanders inflict with it? But just then, Templeton heard a girl's voice asking him if he was the boy staying at the inn in Mews. That's also a nod to Suikoden Volume 1, Episode 2. Nanami encountered Nash in Mews, who was sharing a room with Templeton. Templeton turned around and saw a boy, a girl, and a small child. Templeton had remembered seeing them before the last time he was in the village. He remembered seeing another boy with them, but he didn't appear to be with them this time. The girl smiled at him and told him she's glad he escaped, but there's nothing beyond here anymore as the Highland army destroyed everything. Templeton replied that he knows and that it's horrible. He then fell silent and wondered if they were somehow involved in the war. The girl pulled her two companions away and took them to the house next to the shrine, which remained mostly intact. It was the young child's house. She had survived because her parents protected her. The child put her little hands together and lay flowers as an offering. Templeton and the others followed suit. The girl then thanked Templeton. She told him they were going to South Window and asked him to come with them. She then turned to the boy, whose name was Ryu, and told him that it's only one more person and that Victor and the others will be able to help. Templeton asked her if she knew Victor and Flick and asked if they were fighting Highland. The girl replied yes and asked him if he knew Flick and Victor. She rolled her eyes in surprise as Templeton told her they once fought together. She then introduced herself and her companions. She told him her name was Nanami, that's her brother Ryu, and the child is Pilika. It was just as Flick had said, Pilika was the only survivor of Toto. Templeton then asked them if they knew what happened to the shrine and the rune that was inside. At Templeton's question, Ryu and Nanami looked at each other. Templeton then said if the Highland army took the rune, they need to get it back. Nanami told Ryu that he's a stranger, but if he's an acquaintance of Victor's, it should be safe to show him. Ryu took off the glove on his right hand and showed Templeton the back of his palm to reveal a marking that resembled a shield. Templeton felt the same sensation he felt when he saw the shrine before and asked Ryu if it was a true rune. Ryu replied it's the Bright Shield rune, that he and his friend Joey received the runes in the shrine to gain the power to end the war. Templeton felt that the stars had begun to move and that many people like Colin who despise fighting would get involved. He then told Ryu that he'd fight alongside him. Templeton no longer wished to witness this kind of scenery anymore. He wanted the land to remain the same and for people to live in peace. He told Ryu that he could no longer bear to see things destroyed like this. Nanami asked Templeton about the road to Coronet and how they could get to South Window from where they are. Templeton told them the route and parted with the three, saying he'd catch up later as he still has some unfinished business. He buried Colin's sacrificial Buddha in a corner of the village. He then sat on the bridge and began drawing a new map without Toto, Ryubei, or the mercenary fortress on it. Thoughts of tearing up the old map crossed his mind, but he stopped himself and neatly bundled it into his backpack. He then took a breath and began walking as the story comes to an end. And that's it for Templeton's backstory. As I mentioned at the beginning, this backstory came from a short story titled Indelible Footprints from the Genso Suikoden Short Story Collection 3 that released in Japan in December 2001. If you want to learn more about Templeton, go watch a playthrough of Suikoden Volume 1, Episode 2. He's in it for the first half hour or so of Episode 2. It covers a portion of his time in Muse, and it goes nicely with the beginning of Chapter 5 from this story. So we only have one more short story to cover from the books, and that is Gremio's, which covers how Gremio rescued Tyr when he was abducted during the War of Succession. Anyway, that's it for this video. If there are any other Suikoden or non-related Suikoden topics you want me to make videos on, do let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.